I want to just introduce Hal Conklin because Hal started this meeting without knowing it. Hal was the mayor at the time 30 years ago when we did the first downtown business. Was it about 30 years ago? About 30, yeah. And so he made a comment to me several months ago, which I thought was really profound. He said, you know, if we did it well then and it worked for a long time, wouldn't it be the kind of thing you'd revisit again and try and get a fresh start? So tonight started because of that comment and because so many other people gave me interesting ideas that I heard along the way. And I said, you know, if we can get everybody in the room, and we could get the mayor and some councilmen here and other city movers and shakers, maybe we could get this conversation going where we actually create a cohesive approach to a challenge that we all accept as real. So it's not just the pain of our retail friends, it's not just the look of our community, it's not just the issue associated whether there should be benches and whether we got a homeless problem and all, it's all of those combined and then some. And for that reason, we're doing the panel tonight. And with that, I want to turn it over to Hal Conklin, who you've got his bio, apart from saying that he came up with that idea 30 years ago and he's still a very fresh thinker today. Hal.
Thank you, Ronaldo. I learned a lot along the way, but I realized, especially to the new members of the council, that there was a lot that, if not almost everything, that I didn't know when I started, and a lot of bumping into walls and learning lessons along the way. So you're in for a good ride, but let me just tell you a couple things tonight. One, I'm going to tell you a little bit about history. I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I think we could go, and then I'm going to just share with you at the end some principles that I think are important to remember when you're making decisions about things in Santa Barbara. And I have a few pictures, so I'm going to go through some of these. The first is that about every 25 years to 30 years, change occurs in Santa Barbara. The irony is that it takes 25 to 30 years to do anything in Santa Barbara, and so just about the time you get it done, you have to start all over again. But it's important that you look at the history to know what they learned along the way, because otherwise you will be making the old mistakes instead of the new mistakes that you could make. So let's look at the 20th century. 1925, the earthquake redesigned downtown, partly because it tore a lot of things down, but also partly because there were a lot of people ready to do something new in Santa Barbara. And Bernie Hoffman, Pearl Chase, others had put plans together for 3 years before that earthquake. And when the earthquake occurred, it gave them the catalytic opportunity to make the change that they wanted to do. The next change really occurred in the 70s. By 1970, downtown was a disaster zone. There wasn't anybody down there. And in fact, the last two department stores, Penny's and Sears, were about to move out. Sears did move out. Penny's lasted a couple more years. But the city put together a plan in 1972 that really focused on doing a couple things. One was revamping the waterfront, and then also, of course, State Street. It's hard to remember, unless you lived here in those days, how bad some of these areas were. The waterfront was mostly a railroad yard, and Southern Pacific owned it, and they wanted to develop it with a 109-acre Marina Del Rey style development. Tear down Stearns Wharf, build boats to Milpas Street, and essentially reroute Cabrillo Boulevard behind a bunch of hotels so you could never see the ocean, and essentially own the beachfront for 3 miles. That plan got changed with the city participating in a plan that led to a waterfront plan, a downtown plan, and a plan for essentially revamping Lower State Street. Fez Parker was into that later in the process, but essentially he's ended up being the owner of the hotel, which of course still is. Where the hotel is today is essentially where the Roundhouse was, which is the picture on the right there. And the reason the Roundhouse looks, or the Rotunda looks the way it does, is because it replaced the Roundhouse and the city made them make it look sort of like the Roundhouse. Now, State Street, 1980. This is State at Coda Street. Today it looks like this. This is State at Ortega Street in 1980. Today it looks like this. What happened was they widened the sidewalks, they put in street furniture, they brought musicians and other things down there to sort of create a lively nighttime and daytime activity, and they actually put parking behind the streets to actually make the changes. If you went on the 600 block, it was 4 lanes of traffic, pretty dilapidated buildings, a 1912 movie theater which got completely tore down and Metro 4 was built in its place. That little alley right there is now the Habit. It used to be essentially a shoe shine stand that went back to where the parking lot is today, but it used to be Reed's Auto Wrecking Lot back there. Why did it change? Because a whole bunch of people got together, just like tonight, and really began to look at what were the things that were bigger than retail that they wanted to happen downtown. And this guy, who was one of those meetings, said something I thought was profound. This is more than a place, it's a state of mind. And people really wanted to talk about what was important to them when they went downtown. Why is Santa Barbara downtown different than downtown Ventura or downtown just about any place else? Well, they looked at a whole variety of things that they could do, and I think it's reflective in what you could do today. So I'm going to just point out the 5 major zones which actually divide downtown into 5 sectors, because if you see it all as one place, it's too big to be a mall. It's too big to manage all at once. So the 5 districts that actually made a difference were the waterfront district. It really was the center of the environment of Santa Barbara, and it really created a sense of nature. It was a place where people could come down and know how nature interacted with life in the city, and it stretched from how it worked with children at the zoo to how it worked with fishermen in the waterfront. Creating a sense of place around that district became important and is important today. Secondly, the entertainment district, which really is Lower State Street and really now the Funk Zone. And that creates a whole different dynamic of how you create a sense of place around it. And you really need to customize what you're doing in the entertainment zone separate from what you do in the waterfront zone. The Central City District, which is where most of the retail is, or has been, has a need for a great amount of revamping, but it really is a place where there is a sense of encounter. You really have to build it around the way in which people greet, meet, and interact on the street. It's not just about buying things, it's about the experience they have coming together, talking to one another, eating with one another, and actually walking and participating in the community itself. The next was really a sense of time that they really identified, which is that people live in history here. It isn't just that they study history, it's that the Catholic Church, the central parish of the Catholic Church, is the mission. It isn't a museum, it's actually an operation. That the places that people go to do work in different places are actual historic monuments, but they're for today's people, not just what happened in the past. And finally, that there was a sense of celebration around the arts, and that created the whole cultural district, which has now embraced the whole historic theater district in the upper part of State Street. All of these things are micro communities or neighborhoods in a large city. If you looked at New York, you don't see Manhattan as one place. You see Soho. You see Times Square. You see Gramercy Park. You see all of these neighborhoods, and that's what makes New York unique. You experience it neighborhood by neighborhood, not as a whole city. And that's what makes Santa Barbara unique. You experience it neighborhood by neighborhood. So if you're going to rebuild it, you have to build it in that uniqueness so that people understand it. Now, let me just talk about the 5 principles that I think are important going forward, because we're running out of time. First, you got to have an economic plan. The City Redevelopment Agency was the owner of that plan. Today, nobody owns that plan. And cities that are succeeding make that a key component of what they do. Second, you need to build your housing around that plan. You can't have people on Outer State Street and driving to work in the waterfront zone. Third, you need to plan for all of your development to use the least amount of transportation possible. That also ties into where your housing is. Can people walk to work? Fourth, you need to build it with a sense of place. You really need to understand how those neighborhoods are unique and build it around that unique neighborhood. And fifth, you need to look to the community leadership to make this happen. It needs to include City Hall, but not just City Hall. City Hall isn't going to design this for you. It never has. It's the community that designs it, and City Hall is a partner in making that happen. So let me just say that I think as you move forward, you got to really remember what your history is. You got to really look at what the neighborhoods are as opposed to just downtown as a whole. And thirdly, you need to have this kind of people participating in its plan. That's what made it work 25 years ago. That's what made it work 50 years ago. And that's what will make it work today.
Thank you very much, Hal. That perspective was wonderful.